Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Code to Joy, the four-step solution to unlocking your natural state of happiness. By George Pratt, Ph.D., and Peter Lambrou, Ph.D., with John David Mann. Narrated by Daniel Henning. This book contains advice and information relating to healthcare. It is not intended to replace medical advice and should be used to supplement rather than replace regular care by your doctor. It is recommended that you seek your physician's advice before embarking on any medical program or treatment. All efforts have been made to assure the accuracy of the information contained in this book as of the date of publication. The publisher and the authors disclaim liability for any medical outcomes that may occur as a result of applying the methods suggested in this book. The individual experiences recounted in this book are true. However, the names and certain descriptive details have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. Forward. The 20th century had its share of medical miracles. I should know. When you've survived a heart attack, had quintuple bypass surgery, and you're still going strong a quarter century later, it gives you a pretty healthy appreciation for modern medicine. Still, there are some aspects of the human condition medicine can't touch, or at least it couldn't until now. Modern medicine has made us a lot healthier, but what about happier? That may be where the frontier of medicine lies in this still young century. And one of the undisputed masters of that new frontier is a clinical psychologist named George Pratt. The first time I met Dr. Pratt, he was a guest on Larry King Live, talking about a fascinating approach to healing our emotions and creating lasting improvements in our productivity and sense of fulfillment. Whether it's an unresolved hurt, persistent low self-esteem, or vague sense of anxious unease, said Dr. Pratt, most of us struggle with some version of what we call the fog of distress. It clouds our lives, interfering with our relationships, our careers, even our health. And no matter how many hours you spend on the couch, talking it through just doesn't always do it. Why not? Because there's typically a disconnect, he explained, between what we logically know about ourselves and the place in the brain where our emotions live. Sometimes you just can't get there from here. You have to find alternative ways to get that information to click. Alternative ways like what? Like energy psychology. If you've never heard the term before, you're not alone. Neither had I before that show. But in the years to come, you and I will be hearing about it plenty. It refers to innovative techniques that affect the body's energy systems, almost like a 60,000-mile tune-up of the thoughts and emotions. Using these techniques, as my distinguished guest explained it, you can clear out the past traumas and events that created those disconnects in the first place. The result? It's something like what happens when a fresh wind blows away the clouds. The sun comes out. Actually, he added, it's a pretty easy thing to do, and it works. Dr. Pratt has helped pro golfers and ball players improve their game, jilted young men and women get over heartbreak, estranged couples get their groove back. He has helped people get past the trauma of terrible accidents, restart faltering careers, recover lost self-confidence, and move past irrational fears. He has even helped one talk show host I know, me. Even before we had him on the show for that first time, I knew a little bit about the good doctor. He had worked with two people on the Larry King Live staff, and they had gotten fabulous results from those sessions. Soon, I had him on as a guest again, and this time he talked about creating your own joy. Now I was really intrigued. We set up a time when he could give me a private demonstration of the approach you're about to explore in this book. So we'd have something to work with. I described an emotional issue in my own life. What he did with it in the 15 minutes we spent together blew my mind. To say it was impressive would be a crime of understatement. It was remarkable. When he says it's a simple and easy process, he's not kidding. When he says it works, he's not kidding there either. George Pratt is a true modern-day healer, and what he and his colleague, Dr. Peter Lambrou, have created in the chapters you're about to hear is a brilliant formula for tapping into our highest potential. I predict it will change many people's lives for the better, including yours. Whatever is going on in your life, whatever is keeping you from being as successful, as productive, as flat-out joyful as you'd like to be, there's a path that will take you there. I know, because I've experienced it firsthand. Larry King. Introduction. Stephanie's question. Something is not right. Miss Clavel, in the middle of the night, in Madeline. A few years ago, a woman named Stephanie came to our office seeking treatment. In the course of our first visit, she asked us a question she'd been trying to answer for decades. It's a question millions of people have asked throughout history. Maybe you've asked it yourself. Stephanie's history, we soon learned, was a rags-to-riches success story. Growing up in a poor family, she took a job in her teens as an office assistant for an advertising company. Working her way up through the ranks, she eventually reached the top, so that by her mid-40s she had become CEO and majority owner of the firm. Stephanie also had a rich personal life. A kind and generous woman, she was active in the community where she lived with her husband, proud parents of 2 healthy, thriving kids. In fact, Stephanie appeared to have been living a charmed life in every way, except for one thing. She was deeply unhappy. Stephanie's unhappiness was practically tangible. When she entered the room, it was as if a dark cloud entered with her. As she began describing her situation, it became clear that this dark cloud followed her into every corner of her life. By all accounts, she was a great mother, but she didn't feel like a great mother. She also felt deeply guilty about the collapse of a previous marriage many years earlier, and that guilt hovered over her like the gloom of an overcast sky. Her health was affected too. Now in her 50s, Stephanie was having severe stomach and digestive problems and had recently undergone back surgery for a bad disc. Despite all her successes, that dark cloud had also cast its shadow over her professional world. After a series of management mishaps, Stephanie's advertising company had recently slipped into bankruptcy. For no apparent reason, Stephanie's life was unraveling. "I've seen psychiatrists here in California," she said, "and in New York and in London. I've been on every antidepressant. I've read all the books and articles about mood issues. I've read everything and tried everything, but that unhappiness still persists, and I don't know why. Everyone tells me I have nothing to complain about and everything to be grateful for. And I know they're right. But knowing that doesn't make it any better." And then Stephanie asked the question, why aren't I happy? Over the course of our 60 years of combined clinical practice, we've heard thousands of variations of Stephanie's question from thousands of people. Why am I anxious, nervous, insecure, always worried? Why can't I seem to find or sustain a fulfilling relationship, find work I enjoy, relax when I'm at home with my family? Why do I have this irrational fear of crowds, of men, of women, of elevators, of food, of closed spaces, of open spaces, of being alone, of being with others? Why can't I get over that breakup, my compulsive behavior, my challenges with money, my feeling that I'm a fraud? In a million different versions, Stephanie's question echoes throughout our society, and within virtually everyone we know. You probably have your own version. We are the healthiest, best nourished, and longest living generation in history. By all rights, we ought to be the happiest, most purposeful, productive, and fulfilled generation in history, too. But for some reason, we're not. Why not? It's a puzzle we've been pursuing for decades, and the answer turns out to have something to do with how water turns into fog. Imagine you're standing just outside your home, surrounded by a dense fog, so thick you can't see the other side of the street in front of you. You look to the right, then to the left, but you cannot see more than 50 feet in any direction. You are surrounded. How much water do you suppose it takes to create that blanket of fog that has completely isolated you from your world? Before you continue, think about this for a moment. Don't worry if you're not good at math or have no background in physics. Just take a common sense guess. How much water do you think it took to create this fog that surrounds you? Now, are you ready for the answer? A few ounces. The total volume of water in a blanket of fog, 1 acre around and 1 meter deep, would not quite fill an ordinary drinking glass. How is this possible? First, the water evaporates, and the resulting vapor then condenses into minuscule droplets that permeate the air. In that 1 acre block of fog, 1 drinking glass's worth of water disperses as some 400 billion tiny droplets suspended in the air, creating an impenetrable cloak that shuts out light and makes you shiver. This is exactly what happens with certain painful or difficult experiences. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. Most of the time, when negative events occur, we're able to learn from them, shrug them off, and go on with our lives. The experience simply evaporates, leaving us a bit older and wiser. But not always. Sometimes, especially when we are very young, we have experiences that we cannot shake. Even if they seem insignificant, no more substantial than a glass of water, when these upsetting experiences evaporate, they then condense into billions of droplets of anger, fear, self-doubt, guilt, and other negative feelings, surrounding us with a suffocating blanket that suffuses every aspect of our lives for years to come. We call this the fog of distress. Typically, this vague sense of unease parks itself in the background, like the annoying hum of a refrigerator or air conditioner we have learned to block out from our conscious awareness. But whether we're aware of it or not, it pervades our existence like an insistent headache, interfering with our ability to have healthy relationships, to perform to our potential at work, or to have lives that are anywhere near as fulfilling as they could be. Over the years, that background hum can sabotage our careers, friendships, marriages. Sometimes, as with Stephanie, even our physical health starts to suffer. What is this fog made of? It is part feelings and part beliefs, partly subconscious and partly bioelectrical. You can think of it as an interference pattern, like radio static, typically set up in the early years of childhood, when our defenses were still fairly unformed and we hadn't yet developed our adult, logical ways of thinking. In other words, it lies outside the domain of our conscious, logical, verbal thought process. It is like a computer program running in the background, shading our thoughts and feelings, reactions and behaviors, our view of ourselves and of our world, all largely without our conscious awareness that it is even there. For some, this fog of distress shows up in very distinct and specific ways, such as an unshakable fear or irrational anxiety, a problem in one particular area of life. For others, like Stephanie, it is more vague and generalized. That is, it's not that any one specific thing is so terribly wrong. It's more that nothing is quite right. This is why Stephanie's efforts hadn't given her any relief. Psychotherapeutic drugs like antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications cannot disperse that fog. At best, they can somewhat blunt its impact. Talking it over, whether with friends, counselors, or therapists, won't disperse it either, because it doesn't yield to reason and logical analysis. Trying to talk it through is like trying to reach an underwater cave by driving around the city streets. No matter how long you drive or which route you take, you won't get there. We have to get out of the car, get off the streets and into the water and swim, a different route altogether. Fortunately, such a path exists. That's what this book is about. The worst thing about this fog of distress is that it can be so persistent that we come to think of it as normal. Yet it is not normal. We are designed with extraordinary capacities for growth, self-regulation, and self-healing. Our innate blueprint is beautifully crafted to produce a life of productivity, creativity, fulfillment, and joy. We are meant to be happy. Instinctively, we all know this somewhere deep inside. We all know what it's like to feel a burst of delight. Every one of us has at some point in our lives experienced a sense of ecstatic joy, of euphoria at the sheer sensation of being alive. Have you ever wondered why that experience has to be so rare and fleeting? The answer is, it doesn't. Our clinical experiences over the past few decades have shown us that it is possible to regain that sense of childlike delight at living and to live our lives to the fullest. As a result of this work, we have come to believe that we are all here on this earth to be happy and healthy, to experience joy, love, connection, and contribution. You can become a better, smarter, calmer, more focused, more powerful, and more deeply joyful you. For that to happen, we need to address this pervasive fog of distress, understand where it comes from, and how to dissipate it. We have spent the past several decades unraveling this puzzle, using the tools of conventional psychology along with new methods and insights from the latest findings at the cutting edge of a field of research and therapy called energy psychology. Since we began exploring this new frontier in the 1980s, in our practices, workshops, and public demonstrations, we have administered more than 45,000 individual treatments with remarkable and consistently reliable results. Over the past decade, we have adapted our approach into a simple protocol that you can administer yourself. It is powerfully simple and effective. We've seen thousands of people use it to clear away their own fog of distress. This is exactly what happened with Stephanie. In that first visit, we took her through the 4 steps of this simple protocol. Step 1. Identify. First, looking back through her life, we helped Stephanie identify an early painful event whose impact had cast its long shadow into her world, along with the self-limiting beliefs her young mind had formed as a result of that experience. In Chapter 1, we take you through a simple step-by-step process for doing the same thing. We also reveal what the event was that had such an impact on Stephanie. In Chapter 2, we go over the most common self-limiting beliefs and how to identify them in yourself. In Chapter 3, we explore where these beliefs reside and why they have such a firm grip on us, and learn a fascinating method for flushing them to the surface where we can deal with them. Step 2. Clear. Next, we worked with Stephanie using special breathing exercises and neuromuscular techniques to realign her body's natural electrical polarity and help disperse that pervasive fog. In Chapter 4, we explore the body's biofield and what happens when our electric polarities become reversed or disordered. We also learn a set of techniques for realigning our electrical polarity, incorporating cognitive psychology together with elements from age-old disciplines, including yogic focus and acupressure. Step 3. Repattern. Next, we helped Stephanie permanently release the self-limiting belief we identified in Step 1, and then install an opposite, empowering belief into her being. Chapter 5 explores the concept of self-efficacy, that is, the ability to step into the driver's seat and direct our own lives, together with fascinating new research findings on the power of mental imagery. In this chapter, we also walk you through the repattern step, showing you how to create a new story for your life. Step 4. Anchor. Finally, we showed Stephanie several powerful techniques for anchoring those new beliefs and thought patterns, so they would become a permanent part of her and not simply a form of temporary relief. In Chapter 6, we explain to you how to complete this simple anchoring step and use it in the weeks and months ahead as a quick refresher to ensure that the impact of the 4-step process stays with you. In Chapter 7, we go over ways to use the 4-step process to unwrap further layers and tap into your full potential. And in Chapter 8, we outline some additional simple daily practices drawn from our clinical experiences as well as the latest research that will help you create the rich life you deserve. These 4 steps, identify, clear, repattern, anchor, form the core of what you will learn in the chapters of Code to Joy. In this book, we're going to explain to you what this process is, how and why it works, and how you can make it work for you. By the time Stephanie left our office that day, the dark cloud was gone. That was several years ago. It has not returned. Chapter 1. An Interview with Yourself. What do you do with the mad that you feel, when you feel so mad you could bite? When the whole world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right? Fred Rogers, on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. You are walking through a field, munching absent-mindedly on a snack. The sun is out, the air is balmy, a light breeze at your back. Life is good. Suddenly, you hear an earth-shaking crash. Startled, you look up at the horizon just in time to see a gigantic plume of ash and dust volcanoing up into the sky and spreading out to form a gigantic cloud that will persist for days, weeks, perhaps years. It will blot out the sun and completely change your world. Chances are, you will not live to see it dissipate. Oh, one more detail. You are a dinosaur. Scientists tell us it was an asteroid striking Earth millions of years ago that caused the death of the dinosaurs. The impact threw so much debris into the atmosphere, they say, that it darkened the skies and transformed the climate into what is sometimes termed nuclear winter, so named because a similar effect would result from the explosion of a series of nuclear bombs. The impact of traumatic personal events can have the same kind of effect, darkening the skies of our own outlook and causing a chilling effect that permeates every aspect of our lives. To see how this happens, let's return for a moment to our first office visit with our client Stephanie, whom we met in the introduction. Stephanie's first quarter. One clue to the source of Stephanie's unhappiness surfaced within our first few minutes of conversation, when she described the nagging guilt she felt over the collapse of her first marriage. Though it had been many years since this happened, her feelings were as strong now as they had been then. In fact, in many ways, they were stronger. The old saying, "Time heals all wounds," could not be further from the truth. Wounds like Stephanie's don't get milder with age. They get worse, often digging deeper and deeper grooves in the psyche. To Stephanie, that divorce was an asteroid strike. It may have happened in the distant past, but the debris it threw into the atmosphere still darkened her skies several decades later. This is not purely psychological. Stephanie, remember, was already experiencing very real physiological symptoms too, along with the gradual breakdown of her personal and professional lives. The impact of traumatic events in our lives records itself onto our being on many levels at once. We are talking about something that is physiological, emotional, and energetic, as well as psychological. Sometimes the traumatic event seems as obvious as an actual asteroid hitting the planet. After all, it didn't take long before we were hearing about Stephanie's divorce. She spoke about it within the first few minutes of our meeting. Other times, it is not so obvious. Often, significant events occur in our lives, especially when we're very young and impressionable, that nobody around us notices at the time they occur. In fact, these early events can be so subtle that we ourselves don't notice them or realize the impact they have had. This was the case with Stephanie. As we said, that nagging sense of guilt she described was one clue, but only one. Stephanie's unhappiness did not start there. The divorce itself only added to a cloud of debris that already existed within her, and had existed for many years before that. In the course of our conversation, Stephanie mentioned a number of events throughout her life that had had an impact on her. As we asked about her childhood, she had a sudden thought. "I don't know if this is significant," she began. "Probably not." This is worth noting, by the way. When people preface a recalled event by saying, "I don't know if this really means anything," it almost always does. We encouraged her to go on. "Well, this one time when I was 7, I helped my aunt move some furniture around one afternoon. When we were finished, she thanked me and paid me a quarter. I hadn't expected to be paid, and I was thrilled. It was the first money I'd ever earned." She shook her head slowly. "You know, I haven't thought about this for, probably decades." She paused, letting the distant memory replay itself. "I was so proud. I couldn't wait to tell my family. I bolted home, ran inside, told my folks about it, and held up the quarter for them to see. They were shocked. 'What did you think you were doing?' they hissed at me. 'You never take money from family.' I was crushed." She paused again, as if lost in the memory, then added, "I felt so humiliated." Her parents no doubt meant well. They were only trying to pass on what they considered their good family values, but the message Stephanie took from the experience was fused into her being. It's wrong and shameful to make money. And now, a half-century later, Stephanie had lost a successful company and was rapidly on her way to losing her health, out of lingering shame over a quarter. How could such a seemingly minor event have such a deeply felt and long-lasting impact? To answer this, we need to look at the nature of trauma. Tiny event, big impact. Our modern word trauma is identical to the ancient Greek term for wound. When we speak of a trauma, we generally mean an event, either physical or psychological, that has wounded us severely, causing lasting harm or injury to our body and or mind. Examples of trauma include such events as a car accident, serious injury, the death of someone close, a threat to our own life, an experience in a war zone, a major house fire. A traumatic event is one that wounds and leaves deep scars. When a frightening or threatening event occurs, input from our sensory organs, the sights, sounds, and smells of danger, are transmitted directly to a pair of tiny, almond-shaped nerve clusters deep in the brain called amygdalae. The amygdalae immediately send alert messages to other parts of the brain that trigger the release of glucocorticoids, the fight-or-flight stress hormones such as cortisol and norepinephrine. Bessel van der Kolk, MD, perhaps the world's leading authority on trauma, describes the amygdalae as the smoke detector of the brain. Flooding the system, these hormones provide the muscles with an immediate burst of energy and at the same time shut down all non-essential processes, such as digestion and immune response. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, where logic and rationality are based, goes dark. That is, it essentially shuts down. Severe trauma can have profound and lasting damage, crippling one's ability to trust others and creating a deeply embedded array of symptoms known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. These symptoms can include persistent and intrusive memories, nightmares or disturbed sleep, sudden and seemingly unprovoked outbursts of anger or other emotions, hypervigilance, and a degree of emotional numbness. But wait, you might be thinking. Post-traumatic stress from a scolding over a quarter? That seems a little extreme. Fair enough. From outward appearances, Stephanie's encounter with her parents' disapproval hardly seems to qualify as a bona fide trauma, on a par with life-threatening violence or serious bodily injury. It's not as if she were beaten and thrown out of the house or even punished. She suffered no physical harm. Even all these years later, sitting in our office and talking about it, Stephanie herself had a hard time crediting it as a very significant thing. But it was. Whether or not anyone saw it happen, whether she herself was even consciously aware of it, an asteroid had slammed into young Stephanie's world, and the debris it threw into her atmosphere had never gone away. Even now.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?